Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the auspicious occasion of Valentine's Day. Really, thank you. So, we are here today to discuss the topic of state and statelessness. It's a very, very broad but relevant topic in India, especially as India surrounds various other countries. So, what's very interesting is that India hosts a number of refugees from various communities, but at the same time, it does not have a refugee policy. It does not have a robust refugee policy, and neither is it a signatory to the Refugee Convention or the Refugee Protocols. In 2019, the Union government instead of making a robust refugee policy, they introduced an amendment to the Citizenship Act, which fast tracks citizenship status for refugees who are non-Muslim from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Okay. Then after that, that came under a lot of scrutiny because it introduced the aspect of religion to Indian citizenship for the very first time, which was not the basis of the Indian citizenship law as it was, thought of initially. We have with us today lawyer Manu Shanmugasundaram. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to share with us. I will. Manu's list of accomplishments are so vast that I have to read from my phone to tell you more about them. No, they really are. Um, to begin with, Manu has been a parliamentary advisor to the DMK party in Tamil Nadu, which is now the ruling party there. At the same time, he has also been counsel for a very important case affecting queer couples, which actually, for the first time, recognized that queer couples also need a certain sort of legal recognition. In this case, deed of familial association. I would really like if you could also talk a little bit about that when you're sharing with us everything. At the same time, he also was appointed the constitutional expert for the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu to create citizenship pathways and look at how the state can accommodate and think of the welfare of refugees, Sri Lankan Tamil refugees. So that's what he'll be focusing on today. I think it's really interesting because Tamil Nadu is one of the states that has taken a certain affirmative action to accommodate refugees. And I think that we haven't heard too much about that compared to other states in India, especially with other border states like Assam. So I would find it very interesting if you could talk about that as well as Assam as well a bit. So thank you so much. And without further ado, please.
Thank you. I guess to begin with, I must acknowledge that, yes, as Vijeta has pointed out, it is Valentine's Day. So the fact is that you're all here, which means you all like something academic, which is a good sign for me because I wasn't sure how many people would turn up. I actually was here as part of the India Institute series of talks almost a year ago when I in depth spoke about the LGBTQ movement in India, the challenges, as well as the case which I had represented a lesbian couple who were the petitioners before the Madras High Court, and they sought police protection. It's a very interesting word, police protection, because they were actually seeking, in some ways, protection from the police also. Because as you know, not only your parents, your immediate society, your family, but even the police and the state authorities are not very accommodative, shall we say, of queer couples, queer relationships. But all of this changed in 2021. The Madras High Court passed a series of directions. They issued guidelines. In fact, it was a very interesting case to be involved with because the judge of the Madras High Court who dealt with the case openly admitted in court that he had not dealt with a case like this. And in fact, he sought in his words, he said counseling, but in my words, I asked him to call it psychoeducation to understand the various issues around queer couples, queer relationships, the relationship between a queer person coming out and their parents and the pressure that puts on, both parties. I'm not one who believes that if definitely it's easy to understand, when a child goes through a queer relationship, because India as a society, we must acknowledge, is still not anywhere as progressive as the people in this room. So India, as I say to my young lawyers who join my office, think of a judge as a 55-year-old privileged man. So India is just that, according to me, which is a 55-year-old privileged man, right? So therefore, you have to convince them. I mean, it's not enough to win arguments in these circles or in these networks, but we have to win over the people who are in power. And to that extent, I think I really felt very rewarded, and rare to say that when you don't get paid for a case, but truly it was a fantastic experience. And we continue to work, and as one of the outcomes of that case, we were able to bring in conversion therapy. I don't use the word therapy because therapy denotes something that is positive in terms of treatment, but what is now referred as conversion therapy, but I've been trying to use the word conversion practice, has been now deemed a professional misconduct amongst medical professionals in the state of Tamil Nadu. We've been able to persuade the National Medical Commission to change their curriculum with which they teach, medical professionals, doctors, because until then they were being taught that, say, cross-dressing or transvestism or anything else was actually a psychological disorder. So we were able to change that. We were able to get the Tamil Nadu government to change its police conduct rules to make sure that harassment of LGBTQ couples or LGBTQ activists would constitute misconduct in police. So again, these are very Tamil Nadu specific changes because this was the case before the High Court. But I'm happy to speak in greater detail about it. But I did want to speak today on the issue of, called it statelessness. Statelessness is a fairly complex and wide area, but I will try to restrict it to somewhat my areas of expertise, which is laws, legislative frameworks, or lack thereof, and also the state of Tamil Nadu, which deals predominantly with Sri Lankan Tamil refugees. So Rohingyas, Tibetan refugees, other groups, I'm not the person with the kind of information, but I'll be happy to explain a little bit from the context of understanding the law. As you may know, the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, which I think is what made Citizenship Act suddenly very popular amongst our circles in India, stirred numerous controversies and continues to be a very important talking point. In fact, last week, the context is that the Citizenship Amendment Act was enacted in 2019, but has not been enforced. The rules have not been notified. So 5 years, it's been kept in a sense in abeyance. But the Home Minister last week said that they will, go ahead. So obviously, it has again become a political issue, right? So something that needs to be looked at. Notwithstanding this, what I want to show today or discuss today is how Tamil Nadu has presented an alternative vision, and as part of its larger social justice polity, and has been able to fashion citizenship pathways for nearly 100,000 Sri Lankan Tamil refugees. By doing so, it's become the first state to explore this concept of durable solutions, which is now something that is a bit of a buzzword, but more than that, to understand how we can facilitate the refugees either to voluntarily repatriate or towards pathways to citizenship. These developments have by and large also been guided by Madras High Court judgments. So I'll touch briefly on those as well. My idea is to speak for about 30 minutes and then maybe, have a freewheeling discussion or conversation or answer any questions for another 30 minutes after that. But before I begin, let me first acknowledge Vijayta and the India Institute for putting together this opportunity for me. I've come from Chennai. I'm usually here for work, but this is a nice, non-work or play mixed with work for me to engage in. I must also acknowledge Dr. Vignesh Rajavani, a towering figure in this part of the world, recently completed his PhD from King's, so a rising academic star, and Kriba Munusamy, another brilliant young lawyer whom I had the pleasure of knowing for a long time. So it's great to be back amongst friends also, though it's a new city and I literally flew in this afternoon. So Please forgive me if I'm a little, low in terms of my voice, but I try to speak up. My talk will try and cover three areas. Firstly, I want to talk about how Indian state has approached refugees. Secondly, I want to talk about the specific issues amongst the refugees in Tamil Nadu, so the Sri Lankan Tamil refugees, and within them, a cohort of stateless persons. And thirdly, I want to talk about the Government of Tamil Nadu and its sort of policy and legislative response towards this. Okay. Now, as Vijayta rightly said, India, as you may know, is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention or the Refugee Protocol. In fact, and possibly therefore, India has always viewed refugee issue as a citizenship issue, not as a human rights issue. That's the background understanding with which I have operated and I've come to believe. See, if you go back to the Constitution of India, so 1915, Articles 5 to Article 11 talk about citizenship. So that is part 2 of the Constitution. Okay. Specifically, Article 5 talks about who all should be deemed citizens at the commencement of the Constitution. Okay. So these are people who are domiciled in India. These are people who, were born in India and so on. So this is the 1950. Very interestingly, Article 6 and 7 of the Constitution talks about people who migrated from and to Pakistan. And I think this is the closest we have come to treatment of refugees, because at that point in time, as many of you may know, it was the mass movement of refugees from and to Pakistan, which would have been in the back of the minds of constitutional drafters when they came up with this. But I like to think, upon sort of reflecting on the articles in the Constitution, back then they were fairly broad in nature. They were very broad based. If you see Article 5 talks about those who can be deemed citizens. It says people who are born in the territory of India, either of whose parents were born in the territory of India, so either one, and who has ordinarily been resident in the territory of India for not less than 5 years. So fairly broad in terms of scope, right? And I want to make this point right at the top because I, for one, believe that we've now started narrowing these definitions. Okay? Whether there is a political motivation or otherwise, the fact remains that we are now looking at this from a very narrow perspective. Now, from 1950 Constitution of India, you move 5 years down to the Citizenship Act, which was enacted in 1955. And this again, like I said, a lot of us didn't even pay much attention to this until 2019, right? Now we are all reading up the Citizenship Act. I know Vijayta has written a fantastic article recently on one of the undesirable outcomes of the amendments to the Citizenship Act. But the Citizenship Act is interesting because it tells you again, it builds on the Constitution to say who now becomes a citizen. So there are 2 or 3 ways you can become a citizen of India, if anybody's interested. Section 3, you have to be born in India. And there are some, I'm not going into the details. It says Section 3, anyone who was born before 1987. Then it creates another category, 1987 to 2004, and another category after 2004. The difference is before 87, anybody who was born in India before 1987 is automatically a citizen. Between 87, so it's actually 1st July 87 to 3rd December 2004, if you're born in those dates, then at least one of your parents must be an Indian citizen, and so on, right? So it gets more and more conditions start piling on. Like I said, this is actually a genuinely good law. I believe it to be so. I mean, the original law as it was intended in 1955. But the first villain was not in 2019. The first problematic portion was added in 2003 by the Citizenship Amendment Act 2003, wherein under Section 2(1)(b) of the Act, they bring in a new concept called illegal migrant. All right. And I just want to read out the definition of what an illegal migrant is according to the Citizenship Amendment Act 2003. It means a foreigner who has entered into India without a valid passport or travel document. So somebody who's, like typically a refugee or a person who seeks asylum, turns up without a passport or most definitely without a visa, right? Or with a valid passport and valid visa, but has remained there beyond the permitted period of time. So it's a visa overstayer, right? These are the two ways you can become an illegal migrant. Right? And this was enacted in 2003. I want to insist this once more because I want you to understand the timeline. 1950 Constitution has some articles talking about citizenship. 1955 Citizenship Act comes in for the first time, talks about how you can be a citizen. And then you have in 2003, so nearly 50 years thereafter, 50 years after the original Citizenship Amendment Act was created, there's an amendment to now bring in a definition of an illegal migrant for the first time. It's fascinating, but let's understand this practical because I think this is where sort of, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in its eating, right? So you let us take the case which I'm most familiar with is that of Sri Lankan Tamil refugees. Okay, the start of the civil war or the ethnic conflict there was in 1983, which ended in 2009. But people from Sri Lanka started coming towards into India from 1983 as refugees, right? So from 1983 till 2003, till this definition of illegal migrant first came about, for 20 years, there were probably, it is estimated there were over this 30-year period, there was about 300,000 Sri Lankan Tamil refugees who would come. But let us say tens of thousands had come, if not 100,000, right? Who would come. In all likelihood, in most cases, they would have been either married here or had children here. Definitely, saw a future in India. Hoped that they would become citizens, if not immediately in a few years, or or at least in their children's time. But in all cases, they definitely came and were met at either on the shores of typically the Rameshwaram, Ramanathapuram shores, or in the Chennai airport if they came in otherwise, by officials of the state government and the union government, and in all cases, they were taken into custody, into control of the governments, were given unique refugee identification numbers, were then allotted specific refugee camps. All of this happened. It is not that it is nobody's case that they came in surreptitiously, nobody knew, and suddenly we one day discovered that this person is not an Indian citizen. They are all there. In fact, the Tamil Nadu Police Intelligence, was called the Q branch, the intelligence branch, as well as the Union government's Ministry of Home Affairs branch, they monitor the actions, the activities, the movements of all these people. So all of these people have been here, but suddenly 20 years after potentially they've come and lived here and grown to, have a family here, you've brought in this concept of illegal migrant. Now you have affixed it on them and said, now you're an illegal migrant, right? And from here on, essentially you've been deemed as a violator of law. You're deemed as a person who will probably never become a citizen of India. Like I said, it's very interesting that we hadn't quite appreciated the depth of this particular problem until very recently. But I'll tell you, the first villain in this whole piece is not 2019, but in 2003. Okay, if this affected Sri Lankan Tamils, it has affected every other person. Because please keep in mind, India does not have a refugee law. So they're all treated under the scope or domain of the Citizenship Act. Okay, so any amendment to the Citizenship Act is what governs what happens to hundreds of thousands of refugees. Right? So according to me, the Citizenship Amendment Act 2003 entirely vitiated the whole legislative framework by not only bringing in this concept of illegal migrants for the first time, 50 years after the original act and 20 years in the case of Sri Lankan Tamils coming to Tamil Nadu in India, but by applying this concept retrospectively on people who were already been here. So now even when Sri Lankan Tamils apply for citizenship, they said, no, you're an illegal migrant, citizenship cannot be extended. Though when at the time they came in, and most of them anecdotally and empirically came before 2003. Okay. After 2003 to 9, there was another one big wave at the last phase of the war, but most, I would say 75% probably came before that. So this is sort of a bizarre situation, right? And they're caught in a bit of, I would say, a legislative stalemate now. Now, it is in this scenario that villain number two enters the scene, which is the 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act, right? So now things are bad for these cohorts of people who now been deemed illegal migrants. And what happened in Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, according to me, further worsens the situation by further amending the definition of illegal migrant. So I told you the illegal migrant was defined in 2003 as two things. One is somebody who gets in without a passport or visa, somebody who overstays their visa conditions, right? Now, the amendment that's added in 2019, most of you may be familiar, but let me just repeat it so we're all on the same page. It says that the definition of illegal immigrant is amended like that. It says this does not apply to people who are Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, or Christian. So as she said, non-Muslims, and they must come from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan. It's in a very daft sort of way to say that, so you have to come from a Muslim majority country, but be a minority there, right? The way when this first came in 2019, towards the end of that year, I wrote for the Hindu then, and the way I sort of described it then, which is my opinion even now, is that this starting of a Hindu Rashtra. So for people who don't know Hindi, including me, this is like the promised land for the Hindus, right? And it's a very similar concept. It says all of you Hindus, but of course they will say that no, but it's not only Hindus. We've also included Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians. But anyway, the idea is that, right? Like we are now opening up. You may all come, but no Muslims, right? In 2019, when this was brought before the parliament, so I work with the DMK closely, and I'm actually a member of the party, and I'm a spokesperson, and I'm actively involved. So with that disclaimer, so the DMK actually raised this issue and said, wait, hold on. So you said non-Muslims from these countries. Wait, what about Sri Lankan Tamils? That's the issue we've been dealing with. Okay, and Sri Lankan Tamils are actually, a lot of them are Hindus. There's also Muslims and Christians, but it's like a similar to an Indian society in terms of demographic spread, right? So he said, what about Sri Lankan Tamils? And in fact, then in Rajya Sabha, the member of parliament, Tiruchi Shiva for DMK, he moved an amendment saying, amended to include Sri Lankan Tamils. So that was defeated. Interesting, right? So they don't want Sri Lankan Tamils to get the benefit. It's still not been articulated very clearly. But nevertheless, I think it's a little bit of a moral issue, which even I have not really worked my head around, because on one hand, I feel this is a discriminatory law. But on the other hand, we knew it was going to get passed. So if it's going to get passed anyway, why don't we get more benefits for more people, right? So it can be debated both ways, but that was our position in 2019. So in 2021, when the DMK formed government in Tamil Nadu, the chief minister put together what's called an advisory committee. He said, no, but look, we have to help provide access to citizenship pathways. But citizenship is something that the state cannot deal with. Only the union government can determine citizenship. So as it was that advisory committee, which I have been now a part of for 2 years, and it shows, I think, some of the ongoing commitment, right? Now, that is sort of the place where I want to move you and this conversation towards Tamil Nadu. And really, the Sri Lankan population that has been in Tamil Nadu, it is now estimated to be around 100,000 people there. Okay? And then most of them live in a refugee camp. There are 106 refugee camps. But there's also a small, probably about 25-30% who live outside camps. Okay, so there's no reason why they're in camps or outside camps. If you're outside camps, you have to inform the local police station about your movements. If you're in camps, then you're already being monitored. If you're in camps, you probably will get more socio-economic benefits like rations and all the government largest welfare schemes and all of that. But other than that, there is no great distinction. Okay. And one of the first things we understood as soon as we started working on the Sri Lankan Tamil advisory committee is this. This is not a monolithic group, right? And that is one of the issues we always think. We think they're all one particular cohort. And it is something that I think the government at that point of time had not realized, but we were able to explained to them, what we found is that there were two major subcategories. One, Sri Lankan Tamils, people who had been in Sri Lanka for at least 1,000 years. Okay, what are in Tamil Nadu called Elam Tamils, the people from the north and the east provinces of Sri Lanka. And the other are Tamils from the central hill area, also known as hill Tamils, or the term we now use for them is Indian origin Tamils. These were actually they were a big cohort taken to Sri Lanka under the British rule by the British as indentured laborers to work on the tea plantations there. That's why they were living mostly around the hill areas. Okay, so these Indian origin Tamils, actually most of them had family, very close ties with India. Only in the last 150 years or 100 years, they had actually been moved to Sri Lanka. And the idea was, at that point of time, it is, the British, though it's two different countries, it is all under one British dominion. So you can, at any time come back, right? It was pretty much like migrant laborer from one part of the country to another, in a sense. But of course, at the time when both countries became independent, these people by that time, I think, had grown to have land and family and ties and whatnot. So they continued to work, though in essence, they felt they were Indians. And now, this is where it gets a little interesting, right? So politically, what happens after that? Sri Lanka passes certain laws. I won't go into great detail, but to sort of, start consolidating Sri Lankan citizenship, right? So this leads to some bilateral dialogue between Indian government and the Sri Lankan government. There are three agreements that were entered into: 1964, 1974, 1987. 64 and 74 are the important agreements. First by Shastri for the Indian side and Sri Mao Bandaranaike for the Sri Lankan side. Second, Indira Gandhi and Sri Mao. Okay, so these are the two main bilateral agreements. What these agreements say is that the Sri Lankans living in India would be repatriated to Sri Lanka, and the Sri Lankan government would absorb them and give citizenship. Likewise, Indians living in Sri Lanka would be repatriated to India, and the numbers that they had estimated were 525,000 Indians living in Sri Lanka and 300,000 Sri Lankans living in India. And they, as governments do, they set a very ambitious timeline of 15 years. Nothing happened in 15 years. But anyway, they signed another pact and they said, no, but we will keep doing this. We will we'll register all of them, so on and so forth. Now, I want to sort of stop here and explain or rather share a particular case that I worked on, which I think really sort of shines a light on the plight of Indian origin Tamils. This case was in November last year, so it's very recent in my memory, but is, according to me, the first landmark judgment on Indian origin Tamils getting Indian citizenship. Okay. Now, just to finish what had happened was, after the two bilateral agreements, still they had not repatriated everyone. So a lot of them got left behind in Sri Lanka. And essentially, after the war broke out, they came along with Sri Lankan Tamil refugees, right? Now, unfortunately, because it was a wartime situation, both Sri Lankan Tamil refugees coming as well as Indian origin Tamils, neither of them had any travel documentation, passports, etc., or documentation to show who's who, right? That's the whole idea of being an asylum seeker, that you're fleeing a war-like situation. So the Indian officials on the Indian side, as and when they entered into Indian territory, said, sorry, we don't know you are an Indian origin Tamil, we can't, So they bunched everyone together. So this is the story of one such person. His name is Ganesan, who was born in 1954, so he's almost 60 years now. And he was in Kandy in Sri Lanka. He's an Indian origin Tamil. And once, his father, so he was 10 years old when the first bilateral agreement of 1964 was signed. So his father, his parents said, oh, great, so we will apply for this so we can go back to India in due course. So his father in 1970, when he was around 15 years old, filed an application, and which was considered by the Indian High Commission in 1982. So it took a long time then, I don't know why, but 1982, Ganesan received a passport. It's called the India-Sri Lanka passport, but it's essentially an Indian passport because you can't have a dual country passport, the Indian passport given by the Indian High Commission in Kandy. Okay. So Ganesan then, in 1990, he comes to India with his family, essentially again, very similar, fleeing the war, coming here. But he has his passport, the original passport given by the Indian High Commission. He lands here. The authorities say, no, we don't recognize this. So you are all Sri Lankan Tamils as far as we are concerned. The instruction that has come from the union government and the state government is we have to keep you all in camps. So please go. So he was sent to a camp in a place called Karur near Tiruchi in Tamil Nadu, in the middle of Tamil Nadu, Irumbutipatti camp, and he's been there for now since 1990, so for 20 plus years, right? So in 2020, 2021, Ganesan filed a case before the Madras High Court. So this is how I came to know about it. And so I was appointed as amicus curiae in this court because I was not his counsel, but the court had asked me to assist them with regard to this particular issue. So when we went to court, the first time I saw his passport, and there are very few things that excite me in court when I'm actually there. But this is one thing I felt truly, I felt so impressed by. It was a passport given to him in 1982. Looked still brand new. It had this like lovely linen texture, like, and then it was so well preserved, like better than how, even some of our documents are preserved in museums and archives. And I felt such joy in handing it to the judge, right? Because we said, look, we have it, we have to see it, look at it. It says the Indian High Commission in Kandy has registered him as an Indian citizen under Section 5B of the Indian Citizenship Act. But they've kept him in a camp for 20 years. This is ridiculous, right? The one hand says you're an Indian citizen, and you come, the other hand, they say, no, we don't recognize this. It cannot be. So, of course, it's a very interesting case, and I'll tell you what happened, but the judge ultimately felt that they cannot, actually disentitle him. The judge felt that the citizenship was already conferred by the Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka. So now all we need to do is we cannot confer fresh citizenship. Like how you and me, I guess people who are Indian citizens, when we go to a government office or ask for a passport, they're not conferring citizenship. They're just treating you or recognizing your citizenship and giving you a document in furtherance of it. So that was the case. So it was the first case where an Indian origin Tamil has been recognized as a Indian citizen, right? But this is the interesting part. And again, this is why, it's great to sort of file cases against the government to see what kind of answers you get. So the response that was filed by the Indian government in 2022 or 2023 was that, yes, we've seen the passport, we sent it to, this is the Home Ministry, because the Home Ministry is in charge of the citizenship, whereas the External Affairs Ministry is in charge of the High Commission, which granted the passport, right? So the Home Ministry said, we've seen the passport, we've sent it to the External Affairs Ministry. They confirmed that a passport was given to one Mr. Ganesan in 1982. But we have serious doubt whether this is the same person. Why? Because the photo attached to the passport, as we all know, there's photos for all our passports, is of a much younger person. And the passport is in 1982, at which point he must have been 28 years. But this looks like a child photo, right? So we saw that, and the judge, we didn't even have to say anything. The judge said, but don't you realize this application was filed in 1970 when you were 16? Think about that. Think about the 60s, or where you could not have gone and gotten a photo. He probably got a photo 3 years ago, and the father has probably taken that one photo and given it to them. So it is probably likely photo of him when he was 12 or 13 or 14. But this is the kind of very sort of innovative responses you get when they want to defeat some thing. But luckily, like I said, in this particular case, the judge stood his ground and said, no, this is a meritless sort of a response. In fact, you should have maintained countercopies of all of it. So when we said, where is his countercopy? Do you have a copy of his photos? And they said, no, all of that is lost. So having not maintained that, now to raise a argument that this doesn't look like you, And who else would have something so well preserved for 30 years, thinking this would happen. But anyway, like I said, these are the kind of cases which make it really.
Sorry to interrupt. Did the government appeal before the Supreme Court?
No, they have not appealed yet, at least. But it is a writ petition. So if anything, they will file a writ appeal before the Madurai High Court. But so far, they have not. The direction is to confer citizenship on him and treat him as a citizen. So that is being a very academic thing. They've not done it yet, but we have to see. The judgment came out on 30th November 23. So it's still, it's still early, though they should have filed it already. But anyway, like I said, I'll read a couple of lines from the judgment. Again, like I said, it shows the understanding now that the Madras High Court has of these issues, which I'm very grateful for. So the judgment says, there's a demographic profile of Sri Lanka has majority Sinhalese and minority Tamils. Tamils, however, are not a single homogeneous group. A substantial part of them are natives of Sri Lanka in every sense of the term. They hail from the northern and eastern parts of the country. However, section of Tamil-speaking population residing in Sri Lanka are descendants of workers who migrated from Tamil Nadu to toll in the tea estates of Sri Lanka during the 19th century. Therefore, when Sri Lanka became independent, they were rendered stateless. So this realization that within our own refugee population in Tamil Nadu of 100,000, there's a group of stateless persons. Why stateless? Because when Sri Lanka became independent, they became stateless. When they come to India with their passports, we don't recognize them. But do please understand, I should clarify, Ganesan is an exception. He had preserved his passport. He had brought his passport. Forget that's the second part, right? For 30 years. Not too many of them actually have that kind of compelling documentation. But nevertheless, like I said, now there's a better understanding of refugees, stateless persons, and so on and so forth. Now, fortunately, with this particular case, we are hopeful that we can push for remedies for other people who are Indian origin Tamils and who are stateless within the larger Sri Lankan refugee issue. Does this solve the issue overall? No. So we did the Government of Tamil Nadu did a survey last year. So they found that around 59,000 persons they surveyed within the camps, 5,000 were Indian origin Tamils, and the other 54,000 still fall under the, or should I say, still get hit by the illegal migrant barrier. So they still will not get the, they will not get to use the Ganesan judgment in their favor. So there's still a long way to go. But then again, I want to move on to the last part of my talk, which is how Tamil Nadu, both this Government of Tamil Nadu, or should I say the three parts, the Government of Tamil Nadu, the Madras High Court, as well as the people of Tamil Nadu have dealt with this issue over the last 15, 20 years, which I feel is particularly unique and quite positive. I'll start with the Madras High Court. Firstly, the High Court itself, being a constitutional court, has delivered a number of judgments. There's one judge in particular, Justice G.R. Swaminathan, who has dealt with all these cases on refugees, and right from the earliest in 2019, the case where a group of refugees had filed applications for citizenship and they were not considered. So they came to the High Court and he said, look, you cannot approach this in a technical manner, right? People who flee war will not have all the documents with them. You must take a humanitarian approach. You must be more broad-minded. That was the judgment he gave in 2019. That was appealed before the division bench of the High Court, and that is still pending.
Right.
So it's unfortunate that the sentiment that came from the court is, please don't be too pedantic about it. Please use a more humanitarian lens, but they have not. And the government has quite strongly, the union government has resisted this particular approach, and they said, no, but we will only go by what the letter says very strictly. But again, fortunately, this is where, right? Where the courts can be a bit innovative and smart when they want to. So the court had actually worked around it. So 2 other cases came up in the last 2 years. So again, people who've been denied citizenship, but they applied for passports. Now, our conventional view of passport is you have to be a citizen to get the passport. But what the High Court did is, it directed the government to issue passport without waiting for citizenship to come through. So the High Court said that passport is a travel document. Okay, it is not proof of citizenship. Okay, It is a document which you take. I mean, it is nobody's case. Of course, we are all in another country, and the Indians in another country. But imagine all the Indians without passports in India. Nobody says you're not a citizen, you don't have a passport, right? And Passports Act, the way the legislation is actually structured is, it defines passport as a travel document. So the judge actually has, the same judge, the Madras High Court, this G.R. Swaminathan, he has said that these can be given even to refugees without first deciding on their citizenship application if they show bona fides, if they have, one of them had a job offer overseas, right? So it can be given as a travel document to go and come back and so on and so forth. So I think that is how the High Court has worked around the sort of the union government playing, bad cop or terrible cop, as the case might be. But in this context, also the state government role and what I would call the sentiment that derived from the people of Tamil Nadu cannot be overestimated. The state of Tamil Nadu, meaning the people of Tamil Nadu, generally have shown a sympathetic approach towards Sri Lankan Tamil refugees. By and large, they're sort of viewed as kith and kin of Indian Tamils themselves because of the linguistic ties, right? Because they are a Tamil-speaking ethnic population, which again is not the case for other migrant refugee populations. But nevertheless, I think this has helped various Tamil Nadu government dispensations work positively. This has created great political wills, and both major parties, the DMK and the ADMK, over the last 30 years or 40 years, have actually competed or actually have tried to sort of do better than the other when it comes to doing something for the Sri Lankan Tamil refugee population. So I think, like I said, it's important to have that public sentiment, whereas in many other places, I mean, without getting into sort of we are better than them, there is a lot of culture of othering, Why are they getting these facilities? Are they coming to steal my jobs? Are they the reason for the crimes here and so on? Right? So that general sentiment is not there in Tamil Nadu. So therefore, typically a Sri Lankan Tamil refugee in Tamil Nadu gets all the rations, the welfare, the socio-economic welfare measures that any other below poverty line person in Tamil Nadu gets on par. So therefore, that I think they'll be able to do by and large because of the sentiment. But also, to be very sort of fair also, though I am a member of the DMK, I think no other chief minister or state government has constituted a committee like this, right, to look into this issue. And I know the refugee issue is there in many other states. The advisory committee is led by the departmental, like the cabinet minister. It has a member of parliament and member of legislative assembly, me as a legal expert, members from the UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, and civil society organizations which work in these issues, along with government officials. We've been able to go through, branches of government documents and provide a detailed report to the chief minister on what needs to be done. We recommended action in helping the state government work with the union government to help create more citizenship pathways. In the case of Indian origin Tamils, we've told the state government can already recognize them as Indian citizens and provide more support to them, financial, infrastructural, employment. We've even, provided recommendations around mental health support for people who are living in, long period in camps, so on and so forth. And I can say this from personal experience that as soon as they received the report, they took a few initiatives and they also asked us. So me, a member of the UNHCR field office in India, and a government official to visit all the camps and provide legal awareness to them to tell them what the issue is. Because again, see, for us to deal with it as lawyers or as public policy persons is one thing, but for a person to help them understand the difficulty of Citizenship Act, why they're being called an illegal migrant. A lot of the time when we go to camps, meet refugees there, they say, why are you calling me an illegal migrant? Why I've not done anything wrong. I mean, I left my country because I would have died otherwise. I came here in hope that, I can live and work here. I've lived and worked and, obeyed by all your laws. Why are you deeming me illegal migrant and why am I not getting a citizenship? This is what we get from most of the camps we go to. So it's very difficult to help them make sense of this whole legal architecture. So part of my role last 3 months has been to visit camps and help them understand in simple language what is the legal issue, what are we doing, what can happen. It's not easy to sort of try and sound hopeful when they've lived this for 35 years, right? I mean, a person coming now and saying, "Don't worry, we've got one judgment. This is going to turn everything," doesn't really cut it. So the optimism, levels are low. But again, like I said, this is what we want to do. But we also go and ask them about what can we do to improve the camp conditions, because it's government officials. So we do try and fix infrastructure issues. We ask them, what is it that you want? Would any of you even would like to go back to Sri Lanka? We can facilitate that. But I would say about 90% say that is not an option. They want to stay in India. Of course, some of them would like to go to another country if possible, because they lost hope in the Indian system. But at least, a lot of them do think or consider India to be an adopted home. Now, again, having said all of this, I want to sort of conclude by saying a few things like, how can we shift the compass in this very prickly public policy issue, right? I mean, it is very prickly because nobody has been able to find an answer in 30 years. And I don't think there's something that is easily doable, because it involves governments, it involves law, it involves politics, it involves optics. What does it look? The typical government view is that, oh, if I help you, you will come and ask me for help, right? So all of this needs to be balanced, but also it involves people. End of the day, it involves people, their lives, their jobs, their opportunity, their children, and ultimately their identity, right? My identity as a Indian citizen, a male, all of those, one big chunk of their identity is still not recognized or not even certain. So how do we do this? How do we shift the compass? According to me, three particular points, which is one, we create more public awareness about these issues. So thank you, Vijeta, for this talk. I think we've done that to one extent here. And this is sort of part of my role also, is to go and speak to as many people, as many students, people who want to listen about these issues, so people do understand. Second is, we do need to fashion more such judicial outcomes. Like I said, we had one good judgment, but we need many more to sort of build some judicial avenues for people to approach the high courts and the Supreme Court eventually. And the third is to enhance political will, right? So again, that is one of my roles, is to work with government, help them see a path, right? It's too easy. If you tell any government, any politician, there's too many hurdles, they'll happily put it on the back burner for the longest time. But the idea is the challenge is to try to make them see the way, like how do we navigate it through this maze, and can it be done? How do you work with different governments? We have in Tamil Nadu, we have a government in the state and the union, which are almost, in opposition, in diametrically opposite views on pretty much everything. So how do we do it? So like I said, but before I conclude, I also want to sort of mention one thing in particular, right? And I'm someone who observed politics for about 10, 12 years very closely. There are issues and there are issues like these. What do I mean by issues like these? There are issues where, which affect a large number of people, right? Or concern the nation at large, which, most governments will happily take it up, like a big security issue, external aggression threats, or anything else. But there are issues like that of refugees, which only affects 100,000 people in Tamil Nadu, maybe across the country, maybe 1 million, which is, out of a population of 1.4 billion, it is minuscule, right? So it takes more effort to show to a politician or a judge or anybody that this is something that is important, it matters, and whatnot. Which is why I think it gives me great joy, because I do see governments doing things. I do see the court taking this up as a serious issue. I do see when I go to talks, people do actively wanting to hear about this. So I think that's a good thing, and I'm truly glad that numbers should not matter. For true realization of social justice, numbers should not matter. It's the principle that all are created equal and all have equal access to opportunities and rights that should ultimately determine that. And I'm pleased to say the two institutions I work most closely with as a lawyer and a politician the Government of Tamil Nadu, the High Court of Madras, both, have led the way. I know there is much more to do, but I'm sort of happy that, that my state and my court has sort of, really risen to the challenge on these issues. I know we live in difficult times, and it's quite often, more often than not, we do feel let down by these very own institutions, police, courts, governments, and so on. But these are the positives, right? And one of the reasons I wanted to speak about this particular issue is to say that these issues, these positives must be documented. They must be treated as good practices, if not best practices, so that other states or other agencies can learn, emulate, integrate, and innovate, build on this, right? I'm not saying this is the best example. So anyway, on that reflective note, thank you all for listening. And didn't really keep time, but yeah.
No, we have a lot of time.
So I think I spoke for at least 45 minutes.
Thank you so much. That was just, I learned so much, and I'm this close to joining the DMK movement without like this close. But thank you so much. I really learned a lot, and it's really inspiring because I have not come across too many reports about this in either mainstream media or even independent media. I haven't read too much about this. So thank you so much for sharing those experiences. The biggest kind of takeaway for me is that this is an opposition state. It's a non-BJP state that is trying to find a solution to an issue which it is entirely in the power, in the control of the union government. Like that for me is the key takeaway. So one of the questions I have is, India has so many border states, right? And I mean, Tamil Nadu is a coastal state, but at the same time, I just want to ask, how much power do states actually have? Like, I know you mentioned that, of course, the state has the power to provide welfare, to make sure that these refugees come and they feel at home, and to help them as much as is possible. But aside from that, if it's an issue that pertains to the central government, to the Ministry of Home Affairs, as you have dealt with extensively, what power does the state then? I don't want to take away the state's agency, because states have, like a state like Assam, which has, conducted the NRC while the Supreme Court has monitored it. But how much power do states really have? That's what I want to ask you. And then we'll open the floor for questions.
So this is a very interesting part of the puzzle that needs to be addressed. I always sort of hesitate to go too deep into this because it is very legal and technical. So I don't want it to sound very boring. But so the Constitution separates the powers of the union and the state, right? And then that is sort of how we operate it. And there are some powers which are reserved in the concurrent list where both can. Citizenship is something that is exclusively in the domain of the union government. Okay, so no state, regardless of whether you're a BJP or opposition state, you have nothing to do with that. Now, there are two ways to look at it. I'm conflicted on this particular topic because the more visits I do to camps, the more I realize that what is actually pressing is infrastructure, roads, water, sewage, schooling, access to health facilities, getting their sort of, the monthly dole or cash assistance or the ability to register, a birth, a death, everything that, that we can do. So by and large, 95% of that is in the domain of the state. And that's the silver lining. So that is why when we go, we do start from that point and we do try to address a lot of that. And a lot of those issues, housing, Tamil Nadu government builds houses, one bedroom houses, not very big, but they do get houses. So for them, some of them want to expand their house or get a permission for that because the government built the house, so on and so forth. Those are the issues that sort of, I guess they come up against on a day-to-day basis. So that is what we are trying to solve, and a lot of that can be solved. Now, the issue of citizenship is one of identity. So it's equally important, right? This whole do you want to sort of first, eat your food, or you want to sort of, I don't know, learn how to cook, right? Or something like that. it is ultimately like the identity. Yes, it's very important, but then you and I can sit here and talk about identity because we know our next meal is secure. We know our roof is there, over our heads. We know we have enough clothes. We know, tomorrow is not going to be a difficult day, right? So again, like I said, it's very conflicting. Of course, you want to prioritize questions of identity because they do feel lost. And of course, there's a long-term issue with lack of citizenship, which is that so in my profession as a lawyer, you have to enroll in a bar council, right? So there's a particular provision in the Advocates Act which says you cannot enroll if you're not a citizen of India. So of course, there are young people, young refugees who studied law, been to law school, college, done. And then when they apply for enrollment, they're not. So nursing, again, they're not able to enroll. Medicine. So again, so a lot of them end up being what they call day-to-day contract workers, like painting, mechanic work, things like that. Again, when they want to, so few of them started driving cars, right, like Uber, Ola, and whatnot, but they can't register that vehicle in their name. Again, because why? Because they need police verification. The police will raise a query saying, no, this person is an illegal migrant. Again, that comes in the way. They can't buy land. If you do well enough and you want to buy land, you can register it in your name because the RBI has a particular restriction under the Foreign Exchange Management Act, FEMA, which says that you cannot. So anyway, so yes, but those are long-termish issues. But of course, registering a motor vehicle like an auto driver or a Uber driver, for them that's a day-to-day issue. But others are long-term issues. So we are trying to balance these out. Your question was more around state and union. So there again, like I said, in terms of citizenship, we can only recommend. So the only workaround we have done, what we have done in Tamil Nadu is using this judgment to say that now these people who are already being given citizenship by the Indian government through your High Commission in Sri Lanka, then you can take them out of the camp. You can provide them with the economic package. You can provide them with the housing outside the camp. You can treat them as Indian citizens. You cannot go give them a stamp of Indian citizenship, but for all other practical purposes, the way you look at me, you can look at them. So we've given them that advice, so they will do that. But then, by and large, this whole issue of illegal migrant can only be done in one of two ways, undone in one of two ways. One is you either have to go to court and have it struck down because it is, according to me, unfair and illegal and arbitrary, or you have to amend it again in Parliament. The way things have been now, we've not been able to do that in Parliament. But again, there is hope that at some point you will get a government which will understand this. But then, again, it also requires some political maneuvering, right? So without getting into too much politics, the BJP is okay with recognizing Indian origin Tamils. Because they have this whole the Indian, our culture, we've all been together for hundreds of years, but they're not okay with others, right? So Sri Lankans, they don't Sri Lankan Tamils, but they're Sri Lankans. So for them, they're saying tomorrow the others, they gain strength from saying that these others should not come in. These others, if they come, that is what has actually diluted our own cultural. Whatever strength or history and so on.
What if those Indian origin Tamils are non-Hindu? Will they be included as well?
So again, this is informally what has been communicated, that they don't have an issue if Indian origin Tamils are taken care of, because I mean this is again going into like the sort of the contest between what we see as India and what the BJP sees as India. For us, India is a very recent concept, a British administrative concept. We were different kingdoms, different princely states, very different in terms of culture, food, language, even ethnically and so on, right? So again, like without going into all of that, for very simplistic reasons, what has been told informally is Indian origin Tamils are okay. But once you start asking for others, you meaning not just Sri Lankan Tamils, like any other person working with any other refugee cohort, Chakmas, who've been here for so many years and finally had a Supreme Court judgment which helped them get citizenship through naturalization. But all other cohorts, they are not immediately in favor of. But then, like I said, it will require a greater deal of public awareness raising, sensitization. See, ultimately also politicians are from society, right? I strongly believe that. I believe that they've not jumped from another planet. So if enough people change, if enough people say, no, we want this, if enough people come in support of LGBTQ marriage, then
Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult to see
Yeah.
a party saying, no, we can't, right? So anyway, so that's my
Thank you. Does
roundabout
anyone?
answer.
Thank you.